get him on the 21st and drive home on the 27th.
So you're going to fly up and then drive back.
And we got to load a lot of these things up.
Okay.
Books.
So he doesn't keep his, does he keep the apartment that he's got through the summer? Okay, somebody's bringing stuff home. All right, well, that's good. Got a couple other things to mention, but I'll see if anybody else has things to say before. I didn't realize that Jim Gentry and his wife, he had to leave. He's got to catch a flight. So his flight leaves at 3, but he wants to get to the airport early. So the company he works with, and he explained it to me when we spoke on the phone a few weeks ago, he has to fly to Denver. They're based in Denver every month and stay there for a week. And so he said from now through August, he'll be there May, June, July, and August, 1 week every month. And so he gets to connect with the Bear Valley congregation when he's there. And today is their 40th anniversary. And I said, you need to grab a piece of cake in the airport. He said, we had one yesterday, so he's got that good. But keep him in your prayers. Let's see, something else. Evelyn, what am I thinking? What am I missing? You don't know what I'm thinking. All right. Well, Mr. Ted's been pestering me. You can just tell he's a pest. No, he's been asking me because he's tuning in on Wednesdays when we're using the book. He says, we need to buy these. So he found them. They're as cheap as $15, which is too much. But we found that buy them in bulk for $11 a piece. So I just ordered a case this morning. So if you want one, and you don't want to pay me back, I will never talk to you again. But no, I'm just kidding. But if you do, they're literally $11.11. And we ordered enough. They come in a case. The bulk is, I look on the side. The bulk price was $11.11, but we ordered 24. So we have enough for everybody. And if you want another one, just take it and give it to friends. And so this way you won't just have to rely on what we put on the screen on Wednesday nights, and we're going to follow up and finish what we started with last Wednesday night because we didn't finish the thing on the Tower of Babel, but we'll get back to that. But this way you have your own copy to read through the week, all right? So thank you for being a pest and reminding about that. I'm saying that in good natured as I possibly can. There are good pests and bad pests. All right, anything else before we get started? Any other announcements? All right, so I will mention this. The financial summary that's on the back page, and I'm not looking at it, I could bring it up on my phone. At the end of the month, because there's 5 Sundays this month, this is the first one. And 4 weeks from now, we'll have our 5th Sunday fellowship meal. We did not have one last time because it was the day after Linda's death, but we'll have one this time. And in addition to the meal, we want to have a congregational meeting about all those things that are presented there. If you have any questions, Mr. Matt's doing a good job of organizing things. And I just want you to note that the last 3 lines there are estimates based upon what he could put together about annual budget, yearly, annual needs, monthly needs, and so forth. They're mentioned there. If you have any questions about it, you can ask. And the summary of all the contributions, except for today, through the first 4 months, January, February, March, and April, are there. All right? So that's what's summarized. I put them in a quick spreadsheet, took a screenshot, and put them side by side. And then the average is at the top. So when I'm not looking at it now, whatever the average is that's at the top for the week is here. It was 21, 24, and that's all these. And if you have a question when you look at January 25th that says 0, that's when we had that ice day. So we didn't meet that day.
Of course.
It wasn't that everybody was so cheap they didn't give. It's just, we weren't here. That's my point. We couldn't. So anyway, that's what's that about. I should have put a note about that. All right? And if you have any questions, get with Matt. He'll be glad to help you. All right. So I'd like us to review, what we talked about this morning. If you have any questions or comments along the way, you are welcome to address that. Let me do this instead. I'm going to make this easier so we can do a couple of things at the same time if I can find it. All right, let's do this. And let me go to... All right. So I'm going to make this a little bigger, but I'll have these things open so we can switch to something else if we need to. So let me make this. So in the top left-hand corner, I'm going to have the text. And underneath it, there are different tools that we can use. This is just a quick overview of ESV Study Bible. And this is a background Bible commentary by Craig Keener, who's a teacher at Asbury in Kentucky. And this is just about any other resource. There are hundreds and hundreds of if we need to look at everything. So if we have a question about anything as we're reading through the text, I can just touch something and we can bring it up to look at in more detail. So before we look at chapter 7 specifically, what do we know about Luke?
He was a physician.
All right, he was a physician. What's different about his gospel compared to others?
I think he writes in a more educated form.
Can you give me for instance?
I don't know who does the sentence structure in the Bible. Is that the interpreters?
That's there. I mean, that's the way it was written.
Well,
So,
that's
and
what I like.
I want to be careful about how I say this. The simplest original language, the Greek language, is always by John. John writes in the simplest declarative, this is it kind of statements in the gospel, but especially in 1 John. And he's also very repetitive. We notice that in 1 John chapter 5. But Luke is very distinct in the way he writes and in how much information he writes. The only reason why we know Jesus was born in Bethlehem is not just the prophecy that's brought out in the Old Testament that says he would be born there, but how it actually came to pass is brought out in Luke's writing. Luke tells us why Joseph and Mary ended up in Bethlehem rather than Jesus being born in Nazareth. All right, so that's a Luke thing. So Luke does something else that's very important. Luke ties contemporary events in the context of what's going on spiritually to those contemporary events. And so I'll do this very quickly and come back to that. So if you drop back to chapter 2, and in the top corner, I'm just going to scroll. It says, it came to pass in those days. The Bible moves us. That's a new word. The Bible moves from topic to topic in a number of ways. Sometimes by using a conjunction or a break term like but or and or thus or so. And sometimes it'll do so by moving to a new place. Now when they came to such, Jesus comes to Capernaum, chapter 7, or a passage of time. So notice it says, it came to pass in those days. What days? Well, at the end of chapter Luke, it talks about, Jesus grew up. I'll just back up so a little bit so you can see it. The child grew and became strong in the spirit and was in the deserts till the day of his manifest. This is, when you look at that, that's all talking about John. So now it says the child grew, and that came to pass in those days that a decree went out from Caesar Augustus. So we're leaping to another topic. Caesar Augustus was, the first one was Julius Caesar. Augustus is followed. This is what's going on. All these people are going to be registered. You see the word registered there? Everybody see that? The word register is talking about the decree that went out to do one of two things, or both of them at the same time, for a census and paying taxes. They often went together. All right? So they collected taxes a long time ago. So they didn't draft anything from your bank, or you didn't have to write a check. You had to go to the place of your birth in order to do that, or the ancestor's birth. So that's going to explain this. This census first took place. Now watch all this. So the first person, Augustus, he's the emperor. Quirinius was governing Syria. So all went to be registered. Look at this. Everyone to his own city. Luke's the only one who tells us all these details. Joseph also went up from Galilee, out of the city of Nazareth. That's where Jesus was raised, but that's not where he's going to be born. Into Judea. So you got Galilee in the north, where Nazareth was, Samaria in the middle, and then in the bottom south is Judea, where Jerusalem was. And he went to Bethlehem. That means house of bread. Anything with B-E-T-H means house of. Lechem means bread. Beit Lechem means house of bread. Why did he go there? Because he is the house and lineage of David. He's a descendant of David. So to be registered with Mary, his wife, so the whole registration, census, taxing takes place. That's why he was there. So Luke's the only one who does that. And then it talks about what happens during the time of his birth. All right. As we jump ahead, let me do this real fast. In chapter 3, he does the same thing again. In the 15th year of the reign of Tiberius Caesar, what do you know very quickly between the opening verses of chapter 2 and the opening verses of chapter 3? Somebody back up and read chapter 2 and the first verse or 2.
Well, you've got two different Caesars.
Whoa, what's that mean?
Somebody died.
Somebody died, all right? They didn't vote him in, didn't vote him out.
Probably not in
He
Roman
died.
times.
So what's interesting, notice this. It wasn't just that there's a new Caesar, but look at this. It's 15 years into this new Caesar's reign. That's how we can date things pretty accurately in the New Testament, because Luke ties a lot of stuff about spiritual stuff going on to what's going on in the world. So Augustus is dead. All right, incidentally, the month of August, Augustus, take off the U.S., that's August. So this guy is now the Caesar. And Pontius Pilate, significant because he's going to preside over the trials of Jesus. But we're 15 years into that. Herod, we're going to see mentions of Herod all over the place, his brother Tetrarch and whatever. We'll go down just a little bit. The reason why I'm doing this is because I want to see the details. This is when John, the son of Zacharias, starts preaching and teaching. That's John the Baptist, or John the Immerser, or John the Baptizer, whichever term you want to use. And that's introduced in the very beginning of John. In the beginning was the Word was with God, and so forth. In the beginning of John, it says John, this John, not John the Gospel writer, or John the Apostle. He's the one who began preaching, all right? So that's a Luke thing. So Luke just does that stuff all the time to emphasize what's going on in the world around. So Jesus just finished preaching and teaching in chapter 7, and here's what we read this morning. He comes to Capernaum. Capernaum is on the Sea of Galilee. Has anybody been to Israel? All right. So Sea of Galilee is kind of impressive then and today. And because of the topography of the land, the lay of the land, you know, and the mountainous regions, it was prone to having gusts of wind and storms. They're out on the sea. Jesus is asleep, and the disciples are freaking out because, hey, you know, we're about to die here. All right. And so a tempest in a teapot, and Jesus awoke and calmed the storms. That's part of the Sea of Galilee. So fishing was a big deal. Jesus called 4 men who were fishermen. He called them to be fishers of men, Peter, Andrew, James, and John, in the opening chapters. And so that's Jesus coming to Capernaum. And then we see the notion of this guy that's the centurion. So the whole role of the centurion that we mentioned before, Jesus comes there and is going to heal this man's servant. So I'm going to make this bigger down at the bottom. This is a commentary, background commentary. So the nearest Roman legion was stationed in Syria, which is outside the borders. A legion is referring to a certain size of the army. And so there are different companies and so forth, and brigades. Those are all different sizes of our contemporary armies today. So the nearest legion was in Syria, a little bit away, but many auxiliaries, so this is a smaller outpost, mostly recruited from Syria outside of the land, were also stationed at Caesarea on the Mediterranean coast. And notice it's called Caesarea. All right? So, oh, I'm down here. Do you see anything in Caesarea? Caesar. So the name of the place is Caesarea after one of the Caesars. And there's more than one Caesarea, by the way. All right? So who's doing that? Some of the people who are the local people are building cities and whatever, and they're naming after Caesar just to generate goodwill. Caesar, we love you. We're going to build the city. We're going to name it after you. Oh, I feel honored. You know, so there's a little bit of political patronage going on here and keeping in good stead. So Caesarea on the Mediterranean coast. There's another Caesarea that's inland, not on the coast, was some in the fortress Antonia in Jerusalem. Now notice, I mentioned this before in our lesson about him being a centurion. Just very quickly, Craig Keener, who teaches at Asbury, has mentioned multiple outposts of where the Romans were. You couldn't go anywhere in the land of Palestine except you're going to stumble across a Roman soldier. It's just, they were everywhere. So, you know, it's the interaction on a daily basis is just they're everywhere. It's like driving down the street. You're going to see county sheriffs. You're going to see city police. You're going to see Georgia Highway Patrol, and sometimes multiple of the same entity in the same place or different ones. You'll see, you know, county, local, state, you know, all converge together depending on what's going on. My point is there's just a very major presence of the Roman military all over the place, all right? So there was a fortress, notice a fortress, and not just a small camp in Jerusalem itself. They were not bound to their camp, so they're not just staying there all the time. They wander off base, so to speak, and they're out in public doing stuff that they're due to keep the peace. Not bound to their camps, however, and after retirement, some settled in Palestine and some of them settled in other places. In Philippi, for example, centurions commanded a century, namely 100, which in practice consisted of 60 to 80 troops, but it's just called that. Centurions were the backbone of the Roman army. So they're like, my dad was in the military for 32 years. In the last few years, he was a first sergeant. And that didn't mean he was the first one to be a sergeant, but he was in control of a larger company of individuals in his waning years in the Air Force. And so that's what this did. He might be an inexpensive slave, might cost a third of a soldier's pay for a year, but centurions were paid more. So he had this person who was a servant that he may have owned. Again, servitude in those days was a matter of monetary convenience, and it wasn't from the standpoint of the ethnic slavery that we saw, that we see in contemporary American history. But it crossed all kinds of national borders. So this man had a servant, all right? He was dear to him. That's a powerful thing to notice. You know, what does it mean to be dear to someone? When we, you know, you might call your husband, your wife, your child, or a friend, oh, that's a dear friend. We usually use that as an expression of something about closeness. And so that tells us something about this man, position of authority, and he was close to this person, and he's sick, and the assumption is he's ready to die. So notice he heard about Jesus. So if we're going to back up and look at everything preceding this, we'd get more background and whatever. That news of who Jesus was growing more and more well-known and more prolific, more widespread, all right? Just a reminder, and I know we know this, but just to make us think, there's no television news, there's no social media, there's no Facebook, there's no TikTok, there's no Instagram, there's no LinkedIn. Jesus' face didn't appear, you know, on billboards as you're driving down the road, but yet Jesus was recognized almost everywhere he went. And the reason why was because he traveled wildly. He traveled widely in the northern province of Galilee, where this is, later in Samaria, sometimes outside the borders of that, in Syrophoenicia, and then also in the southern province. And so it got to the point almost, and it's not an overstatement, that there's nowhere Jesus could go except he drew crowds. On one occasion he was in the house and the people were so packed, the group of men who brought somebody to be healed couldn't get in, just took them up on the roof, disassembled the roof and let the person down, all right? And on one occasion when he flees just to have some respite, some time to relax, to Syrophoenicia, a woman recognized him, and then a crowd drew. So my point is, somehow or another, the well-knownness of who Jesus was reached the centurion. You know, it could have been, and when I say could have been, we're doing some speculation in part here. I'm not trying to do anything outside of Scripture. But he was so much spoken about that there's no way a Roman centurion who's in command of all these men wouldn't have heard from somebody who was one of his underlings, not being dismissive there, said, hey, you know, have you heard about this guy Jesus that the Jews are following? Have you heard about all the stuff that he's doing? And so word would have gotten to him. Notice it says he heard about Jesus. So what did he hear? I don't know the specifics, but he had enough of what he heard that he heard something about what Jesus could do. And the hearing about what Jesus could do made him think that maybe this man who's doing these things, this Jewish teacher, this Jewish rabbi, could come and heal my servant. So there's an element of faith there already before the actual healing takes place. Now that's just kind of powerful. So tell me what you know about Rahab. Who was Rahab?
Harlot.
All right. Tell me something else about Rahab.
She saved the two spies. They went over.
All right.
She invited them into her house, so she was spared whenever they invaded Jordan.
Jericho.
Jericho.
It's a J.
Yeah.
She aided God's people.
All right. Why?
She believed.
Where did it come from? Somebody said it. What did she know before she ever met them?
She knew about Jesus.
Not Jesus.
She knew about God.
How?
God.
Protected his people.
How did she hear that?
His people.
How did she know that?
Word spread.
Word spread. If every last piece of social media and electronic means of communication disappeared overnight, you think people are going to not know what's going on around them? You're going to bump into this person sees this person tells this person tells 100 other people. News still spread. So when Paul gets to the city of Athens, there are a group of people who just sit around and talk to people all day, find out what's going on in the world. Because it was a cultural center of influence in the city of Corinth like that. Well-traveled, people go through there. And so people are talking all the time. All over the world, people are traveling. And so he heard about these things just like Rahab heard. What did she hear? She heard that these people were delivered from Egypt. Everybody in the wide world knew who Egypt was. They were a powerhouse in those days. That they were delivered from Egypt. That how in the world did that happen? Well, their God did that. Who is this God? He sustained them through the wilderness, brought them up to the borders of their land, and they heard that the Israelites that were enslaved in Egypt conquered 2 kings before they got to Jericho, and they were heading that direction. And she said, we have fear in our hearts because of you. That all came from hearsay that happened to be true. So word spread, just like it does all the time. And so he hears this. So he sends elders of the Jews, we talked about this already, pleading with him, Jesus, to come and heal his servant. When they came, they begged him earnestly. So there's a connection in I don't want to overbuild it, but it's reflected in the text of how close he was to them and how close they were to him. And they weren't on the same page religiously. You may not agree with where somebody is in a political belief system, a religious belief system, any economic-based system, whatever. You may not agree on a zillion ways about how to raise kids, but these people connected. They were totally in different places from the standpoint of where they came from and what they were about. But notice, and this is the ESV, New King James says, he was deserving. The translation I used this morning talked about he was worthy. He loves our nation and he's built us a synagogue. Now that's just incredible for this to happen. So notice the notes at the bottom, and I'll make them a little bit bigger so you can see this. Comments on this. Non-Jews who feared God. Notice, non-Jews who feared God. Anybody think of somebody in the book of Acts that was a non-Jew who feared God? Cornelius. What was Cornelius?
He was a centurion.
Same role. Different guy, different circumstances, but he was a centurion. He was a God-fearer. Did he know everything about God that the Jews did? Nope. But there was an affinity for this God based upon who they were. Very, very, very quick. What did God intend Israel to be to the rest of the world?
An example.
An example.
A light.
A light. So that when they saw Israel, they would see God. That's the whole power of the nation of Israel. You are my representation to the rest of the world. And Ezekiel says, if you don't show God's light to the rest of the world, then God's going to find somebody who will.
I would ask a question in regard about the man said he was not worthy to be in the presence of God. And then he said he was unworthy for him to come into his house.
Yeah.
What went on during that time to make someone think that way? Even though Jesus was a present among a lot of people, and even the Bible say he
I don't know.
fellowship with sinners.
I don't know all the answers to that, but there was something about this man's character that recognized the greatness of Jesus, though he'd only heard had he ever witnessed anything that Jesus did? Don't know. But he heard enough about it that he had that degree of faith. But there's something about his character. Have you ever been in awe of some ability that somebody has that you've never met? Anybody ever go to baseball games? You know all those guys that are out on the field? You know, I'm a Phillies fan, not a Braves fan. So when I go to see the Braves play, I'm going because the Phillies are in town. I wear all my Phillies gear. And I remember, and people, why? Dad, don't you do that? You root for your team. So, but anyway.
When in Rome, do as the Romans do.
No, the ball stadium's not in Rome. It's right here in Atlanta.
Well, twist it around.
All right, I got it. No, my point is you connect with people that are famous or noted for whatever, all right? So, you know, I haven't met world famous people, whatever, but I can know something about them based upon their reputation and what other people say about them. So to some degree, Rahab had that degree of faith in God based upon what she heard, and so the centurion. And so he demonstrates an affinity for these people. So notice the bottom of the screen on the left. Non-Jews who feared God and donated substantial sums to the Jewish community were well respected. So remember, he's not just a plebe, he's not just an underling, he's a commander of a group of people, and he's well paid. So Cornelius was generous in helping the Jews. This centurion, who's nameless, did the same thing. And one of the things he helped them do was to build a synagogue. So, well respected. Those requesting help often sought someone respected by the benefactor to intercede on the requester's behalf. The centurion may have, notice the word may, have been able to intercede for their town with higher Roman officials if necessary. So let me just, think about this dynamic. If you're an occupying force in a country that's not yours, one of the things that your job is to make sure no uprisings take place, and your job is to keep the peace. We call them police officers, but we also sometimes refer to them as peacemakers or officers of the peace, peace officers. So one of the things that they would do is they would do something to build up some sense of trust in the community. They're not just there to bring the bad guys down, they're also there to do good to the people who are good, all right? So there's that sense of connection with the community, even though you're not part of the community, because you want to keep everything on an even keel. So one of the things that would happen if there was turmoil in some part of the empire, and the leaders up and down the line, ultimately going to the Caesar, found out about it, they'd say, if you can't take care of this situation, this uprising here, we'll find somebody to take your place. That happens all the time. Happens every day.
But that's what Pontius Pilate did when he was...
He wanted to curry favor.
Yes.
He wanted to curry favor. I haven't found anything that this man did that was wrong, but I need to keep peace with the people. So rather than having Jesus released, Barabbas was released. So that was a peacekeeping thing. And one of the Jewish leaders said, it's better that one man should die than our nation should be squashed. So we're going to let this one guy die, Jesus. To him, he was a troublemaker. To them, he was a troublemaker. Didn't grasp that he was the Son of God. That's why Peter and later others said, if people really knew who Jesus was, they wouldn't have done what they did. They didn't grasp the gravity of Jesus' identity as the Son of God. So there's some understanding that this guy has about who Jesus was, all right? So notice, ancient Mediterranean culture stressed reciprocity. You scratch my back, I'll scratch yours, and we'll get along together. That doesn't mean it's an arrangement for convenience sake, not because you buy into everything that people do. You're just trying to get along so that nothing bad happens. You know, what do we need to do to quell this trouble? What do we need to keep everything under control? You know, your lives might depend on it. My lives might depend on it. Your livelihood might depend on it. My livelihood might depend on it. Let's make sure these things don't get out of the time. Now notice the salaries that he mentions. Now this is not the text at the bottom. Centurion salaries were roughly 16 to 17 times those of the troops, perhaps 30 to 60 times for the highest ranking centurions. So they were not only in the army, they weren't commanding everything, but they were in a position of influence and wealth, and they could command respect based upon what they did with their bucks. All right, and this man befriended the Jewish people to the extent, again, of helping them build a synagogue. So they respected him for his help, but they also seemed to respect him for his character, not just because of the help. All right, but for this centurion to have built the local synagogue, notice this, might nevertheless represent years of savings. You know, he didn't just put up a tent. He built something permanent. So that degree of commitment was a big deal. And so there's something about his greatness and his generosity, but there's also something about his humility. So when Jesus saw this man who couldn't come to him because of a sense of unworth and didn't want Jesus to fully come to him, and he was not far, you know, almost around the corner is the sense it could be, that another messenger said, no, don't come, just heal this man from a distance. Jesus was impressed that he had that degree of faith. The faith of the other man that we talked about, the scribe, drew conclusions that Jesus didn't explicitly state, but he said, if what you say is true, then that's the foundation of everything. So he saw something that Jesus wanted him to see without literally telling him that, and the man grasped that. That's an issue of faith. So notice, he wasn't a full Jew, retained some of his uncleanness as a Gentile. So many of the religious leaders' impression was, you can only associate with people that are just like you. And Jesus got into trouble for associating with people that were not like him or the religious leaders. Why do you eat with those people? They're not us. They're not part of our group. They're not part of our posse. They're not part of whatever other term you want to use. They're out, we're in. And so Jesus was an outsider. And Jesus kind of pointed out the inconsistency, the difference in the methodology of John, who was very esoteric and ascetically removed from everybody, and Jesus engaged in conversing with everybody. They said, you didn't like what John did, and he just kind of, you know, was the hermit guy living in a cave, you know, dressed like a wild man, like Elijah or whatever, who's ate locusts and wild honey and wear raw skins, you know. And that was one extreme, and Jesus fully engaged everybody who didn't like that either. He said, you can't be pleased. So that was an issue, not necessarily of style, but they didn't like what the people were teaching, right? So that's something about the nature of this man. I'm not worthy you should come under my roof. Therefore, I did not even think myself worthy to you. So verses 6 and 7 literally state two senses of unworth. I can't come to you. I can't let you come to me. That only makes sense, all right? I'm a man under authority, have soldiers under authority, tell them do this, and they do it. And Jesus heard, I say to you, I haven't found such great faith, not even in Israel. That's just a powerful statement. There are people that are not what they need to be religiously, that are God-fearers. Doesn't mean they know everything about God. Doesn't mean they believe everything about God. They may not be able to quote scripture like you do, but they have some rock bottom rooted, grounded things that are so much due to who God is that it defines them in part. That needs to be expanded, and they need to build on that. And that's one of the reasons why we need to find out where people are. What do you think? Do you think there's a God? You know, I don't know that. You know, it might be. There's a man by the name of Paul Davis. You can look him up. I think he still teaches at Arizona State. He's a physicist, and he's a research physicist and astrophysicist. And he's written a lot of books about the existence of the world and how do we account for it. And I heard him speak at the Library of Philadelphia many, many years ago on a book tour. And I forget which particular book that he was promoting. I've read several of his books. And he's not a theist, he's not an atheist, he's not an agnostic like he doesn't know anything, but he's not sure of some stuff. And I went and spoke to him at this particular book signing, and I said, I've heard you speak, and I've heard and read, some people who are in the same field that you are, high degree of scientists, high respected, or just as anti-God as you could possibly imagine. Richard Dawkins is somebody that's like that. I'm not even sure if he's still alive, but I haven't heard of his death. And he's just vicious in his attack on people who believe in matters of faith. And Mr. Davis said to me, I'm just this close to him as I am to Ted, he says, I may be wrong. So here's a guy who's one of the foremost astrophysicists in the world, I think he's Australian, that had immigrated to England, where he got his education, but he's now teaching in a major research facility in Arizona. And he researches all this stuff all the time. And I recommend you read his books. I'm not saying I agree with everything, simply because he's always looking. He's always looking. He buys into and when I say buys into, he understands that there's a principle of design in this world that's not explainable simply by purely natural forces. What's that mean? There's got to be something outside of the realm of nature that we can't see that's responsible for what we do see.
He's recognizing a creator.
So, and he may not say it in those words, but there's some mind design that lies out there. And he said,
Too perfect.
I might
He
be,
realizes that.
I might be wrong. Now, some people say there's design from the bottom up, not from the top down. That's the way they like to describe that. But my point is, there's something there that you can start with. And there's something there in almost everybody. Skip the whole issue of the creation of the universe and the uniqueness of God. Unless somebody is a very, very serious psychopath, and I am not qualified to evaluate people in various stages of mental health, even the most evil people have a line that they won't cross, morally speaking. I can't do that. I'll do all this, but I can't do that. Why? There's a trigger there that creates a sense of that's beyond what even I think is allowable. I'm going to do good for my evil friends because we're friends. Think of, well, okay, they're still evil, but there's honesty among thieves, supposedly. And so there's a moral boundary beyond which they can't go. So they're not necessarily God believers or God fearers in the sense that this man is, but there's a line that they can't cross. I can't do this. And so this is one of the things that was brought out in the Nuremberg trials after World War II is what the Nazis had commanded and bought into was that they could do whatever they wanted because it was their law. And Justice Jackson, who's one of the Supreme Court justices who was involved in the Nuremberg trials, he said they violated principles that are beyond time and place, meaning that they're always wrong, regardless of where it takes place. You don't just slaughter people because they're not like you. You don't slaughter people because you assume that you're part of a super race. You just don't do that. And that crossed a line. But for some people it was justifiable. Some for people it was not. So the hero stories during all this time about people who weren't Jews, who did all sorts of things to save Jews and rewrote laws and did all sorts of things to spirit them away and to save them. There are lots of stories like that. Why did they do that? It's not because they were Jews themselves, but they were kind of like the centurion who was sympathetic to them in part. So that's a mindset that goes on about why is anything here rather than nothing? And why is there some sense of morality? That's an amazing thing to study. People who don't believe in God can really jump through lots of hoops and do some very fancy, footwork in order to get away from how you admit that there's some degree of wrong everywhere, rather than just counting noses. All right, there are more people in this room, on this side of the room, so they have a right to vote for what they believe is right or wrong based upon numbers. When there are fewer people here, they're not in the same space. That happens everywhere. I don't know about Georgia, but in the state of Tennessee, there are dry counties. That doesn't mean it never rains there. It says they have voted against selling alcohol, not beer, but the stuff, the tougher stuff. Why? Because they had the votes. You cross an imaginary line. Sometimes it's a creek, sometimes a river, sometimes it's something else. And on this side, they voted for it. What's the difference? The numbers. So David Hume was of the mindset, and many philosophers since then, the mindset is whatever's right or wrong is based upon the number of votes. Who's for it? Who's against it? So if the for it wants this, this is what's right. So you just step across an imaginary line, and all of a sudden what's wrong becomes right, or what's right becomes wrong. There's Isaiah. Don't call evil good, don't call good evil. And, it's good here, it's not good there. And they're very educated people who can do that. So my point is, and the major point in this, and we're running out of time, is the centurion had a degree of faith that started with something about what Jesus could do, even though he wasn't all the way there. What happened to him later? I don't know. One of the things I like to read as you read through the book of Acts, you will see people who did not believe who Jesus was change their point of view. So let me do this very quickly and then we'll end. So if you go to John chapter 7. After these things, this is the top left, Jesus walked in Galilee, for he did not want to walk in Judea. That's where they sought to kill him. Now the Jews' feast of tabernacles was his hand. His brothers therefore said to him, therefore depart from here and go into Judea, that your disciples also may see the works that you're doing. For no one does anything in secret while he himself seeks to be known openly. If you do these things, show yourself to the world. Look at verse 5. Everybody see that? For even his brothers did not believe in him. It doesn't mean they didn't believe Jesus existed. They just didn't believe he was the Messiah. James, that wrote the book of James. Jude, who wrote the book of Jude. What were they? Family. So as you read through the book of Acts, you'll see a passage that says, and a great company of priests were obedient to the word. Well, they were some of Jesus' deepest rivals during the course of his ministry. What changed? Just a reminder, Peter said, if people really knew who Jesus was, they wouldn't have done what they did. You killed an innocent man. There's nothing sadder than reading things that, his last name escapes me, Brian, that started the Equal Justice Initiative that's based in Montgomery, finding out that somebody was wrongly accused of crime and spent 40 years in jail for something they never did. If they knew the truth then, this would have never happened. They can be released, but you can't get the 40 years back. Jesus wasn't jailed for 40 years. He was killed for something he never did. And so that's just powerful. Evelyn, you were going to say something.
Just, back to the centurion, when the elders came to Jesus to plead for him, it's interesting to me that they didn't just say, hey, he does good stuff for us, he's really nice to us. He said he loves our nation, and I've checked, and it's agapao, that kind of love.
Yeah.
And so this man was...
It wasn't just a quid pro quo thing.
Yeah.
Good point.
Their description, this was a wholehearted, devotion to their nation. So, we look at the nation, in this history, we can focus on the priests and the scribes, the Pharisees that were against him, but there were good people. And at the core was Jehovah. And so, what led this man to have this devotion? Did he read scripture? Did he maybe have, interaction with good Israelites who really were, honoring God? It's just interesting to think about. We don't know. But it's interesting that it wasn't just a quid pro quo thing.
Right.
He loved Israel.
Right.
For whatever reasons.
So this is what I just mentioned. I click one thing and 15 screens pop up. This is following up on what Max said. Jump to Acts 10. There was a certain man in Caesarea, different place, called Cornelius, a centurion of what was called the Italian regiment, meaning he's not from that place, a devout man and one who feared God with all his household. That doesn't say that about this centurion in Luke, who gave alms generously to the people and prayed to God always. That's not said about this centurion. But the point is, there's something that's going on in this life. He observed him. He said, "What is it, Lord? Your prayers and alms had come up from a memorial before God. This is powerful." God took note of what this man was praying. "Send men to Joppa and send for Simon. His surname is Peter. He's lodging with Simon a tanner by the sea." And he said, took 2 of his servants and a devout soldier and sent them to Peter and said, "Come." And this is where Peter has a vision about eating things that were forbidden under the law. He says, "Rise and eat." "No, I can't do that." "Rise and eat." "No." "Rise and eat." "No." 3 times. And God says, "What I've called clean, don't you call unclean." The dietary restrictions change, and that's powerful. What makes something right or wrong? It's what God says, not what I think. And so Peter, there's nothing inherently wrong in some particular food, but it was a matter of demonstrating your obedience to God. There's nothing inherently right in being baptized into Christ for the remission of your sins, as if there's power in the water, in the act. It's because God declared it as a point of demonstrating your righteousness and submission to Him. Naaman wasn't going to go to that muddy river to have his leprosy removed. And his servant said, "If you asked to do something big and bad, something great, would you have done it?" And the implied answer was, "Yeah." He said, "Why won't you do when he asks you to do a lesser thing?" Because sometimes we like to think that something we do is powerful because we've done it. But Jesus said, even a cup of cold water given in my name, He takes notice of. Have you fed people who need feeding? Have you clothed people who need clothing? Have you visited people who are in prison? Well, those aren't mighty works. Nobody said they were mighty works. They're a service to other people. And so this man, centurion, Cornelius, had a sense of serving the Jews, as did the centurion who's nameless in Luke 7. All right, so next week, gone beyond our time, I never do that, being snarky, we're going to look at another passage that's going to talk about not far from God, and then we'll return to Jude. All right, I mentioned this again. I looked at this, and this is cool. The place that I ordered these books from, there's no shipping. And so it's literally $11.11. And to get them in bulk, I ordered a case of 24. If you want one, just reach out to me and be nice. If not, we'll still have them available, and there'll be extras available as well. So thanks, Ted, for spurring me on to make that happen. All right, anything else? Anybody got something exciting about? Again, Addison gets to graduate. Woohoo! I mean, not graduate, finish a year.
Yeah.
But you're still taking 3 classes this summer, right? All right. So, and keep Tristan in your prayers. And I always mess up on the bulletin about which brother's going to be here because I know Tristan works every time. So just assume I don't know what I'm doing because I don't. But he's going to be starting school this fall, so keep him in your prayers too. All right, anything else? It's good to see everybody. Matt, could you lead us in a closing prayer?
Sure. Lord, thank you again for this beautiful Lord's Day. Lord, we're thankful to be able to come together as a church family and study and learn